Okay, so today I just wanted to talk about a story from the Bible, which is about King Herod and John the Baptist. This is in Mark chapter 6. This is actually the more detailed version of that story. The story is also mentioned in Luke, but it's a brief version of it. And it's also mentioned in Matthew. And it's a little bit more than a brief version, but Mark chapter 6 has more details. So John the Baptist was with the other disciples along with Jesus, and they were going around a particular town or city, and they were preaching repentance. They were casting devils out of people. They were healing people. So King Herod had heard about John the Baptist, and he said that John the Baptist was risen from the dead. He also said that mighty works show forth themselves in him. The other people that were with King Herod, they said, no, it's Elias, and that's also another name for Elijah. One of the other people said, no, he's a prophet. So King Herod once again said that John the Baptist was risen from the dead, and he had beheaded him. John the Baptist told King Herod that being married to his brother Philip's wife, Herodias, was a sin. And so as a result of that, King Herod had John the Baptist thrown into jail. So one day on Herod's birthday, they had a celebration, they had a party. And so Herodias' daughter, I think her name was Salome, but I don't think it's mentioned in the Bible. But Herodias' daughter, Salome, danced for everybody, and they were all pleased. That's what the word says. And so King Herod tells Salome that whatever she wants, he'll give it to her. And so Salome runs back to her mother, Herodias, and asks, well, what should I ask for? Herodias says, tell him that you want John the Baptist's head on a platter. And so Salome tells King Herod that. He regretted making that oath, but he still went through with it. He sent orders for John the Baptist to be beheaded. After John the Baptist was beheaded, his head was given to Salome, and then she gave it to her mother, Herodias. And I just noticed several interesting things about this story. So one of the things that I noticed was that when John first arrives, King Herod says, this is John the Baptist, the one who I beheaded. He's risen from the dead. But it was strange because John the Baptist wasn't dead yet. I think this represents what is going to happen to Jesus, because Jesus was going around preaching against sin and he was healing people. Jesus is the one who rose from the dead. And I also think that King Herod's statement was just an indication of what was going to happen. So another interesting observation from this story is that Herod throwing John the Baptist in prison, and Herodias telling her daughter to tell the king, ask for John's head on a platter, that just reminded me of how the Pharisees hated Jesus. Jesus called them out on their stuff. He basically exposed what they were doing behind closed doors, but yet they were putting on the front like they were one way, but he was exposing what was inside of them, and they didn't like that. It's like the Pharisees, they didn't like that their sin was being exposed, and they had to stop Jesus. And in this story with King Herod and John the Baptist, it seems like Herod didn't want to really hear about his sin, and Herodias didn't want to hear about it either, so they put a stop to John the Baptist. When people are doing something wrong and they know they're doing wrong, they don't really want to be called out. They don't want it exposed. So the marriage between King Herod and Herodias was a sin because it was considered to be incest. Philip is Herodias' ex-husband. Philip is the half-brother of King Herod. Not only that, Herodias was the daughter of King Herod's other half-brother, Aristobulus. So Herodias was actually King Herod's niece. So that was why John the Baptist was saying that that was a sin, that it wasn't right. So another interesting observation that I had was that King Herod, although he was this powerful king, he had a fear of people. In Mark chapter 6 verse 20, it says, "For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and holy, and observed him. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly." So that sounds like King Herod was paying attention to the things that John the Baptist was doing, and he feared him. He was a holy man. He could see that. He seemed to be open to what John was teaching. So that particular verse reminds me of why it's important to live right, because you never know who's watching. When I say you never know who's watching, it's not that you need to like have a stick up your butt and just be all stiff and just not let your personality shine through. When you live right, other people take notice. The way that you carry yourself, the way that you live, it makes an impact. It could impact somebody. It may help them to change something that they don't like about themselves or something that's going on in their life. Herod seemed to have a fear of people. So in Matthew chapter 14 verse 5, it says that, "And when he would have put him to death," referring to John the Baptist, "he," King Herod, "feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet." So he didn't really want to put him to death because he was afraid of the people that were, I guess, starting to follow him, starting to believe what he was preaching in regards to Jesus. He wasn't really trying to kill him. Herod feared his wife Herodias. Once he made that promise to her daughter that she could have anything that she wanted, and Herodias told her daughter to say, "Tell him you want John the Baptist's head on a platter." And King Herod didn't try to stop it. He didn't say, "Oh no, hold on, we're not doing that." He just went ahead with it. It's really something how the fear of people can just make you do what you know isn't right because you're afraid of what they're going to say, or you're afraid that maybe you'll fall out with them, or maybe you won't be seen as influential or as having authority. Maybe that's what happened in King Herod's case. But I also wondered if it was just the fact that he made this oath and he just didn't want to take it back. Maybe King Herod wanted to keep his word. Maybe he thought that if he changed his mind, that he would be seen as not having power or not being authoritative. But King Herod making the oath to Herodias' daughter, it also reminded me of Daniel chapter 6. The men that were jealous of Daniel because he was such a good worker, they had the king to create a contract to basically say anybody that prays to a god other than the king will be thrown into a den of lions. And once he signed it, it couldn't be changed. So maybe it has something to do with how they did things back then, possibly. But I feel like King Herod could have still said something like, "Hold on, we're not doing that. You can have something else instead." Fear of people can lead you into the wrong direction. Proverbs 29:25 says, "Fear of man is a snare." And whenever you worry about what people think, it does lead you into a trap. It causes you to do things that you should not do. It prevents you from doing things that you know you should do, especially if God calls you to do something, or if it's just doing the right thing. If you're worrying about what people think, how you'll be perceived, it's basically like you're under their control. And sometimes it's easier said than done. Like, don't worry about what people think. Sometimes it's not easy. And especially living in a world that we live in, where there's so much going on in the world, and there's so many different messages and narratives where you're being told that you need to do this, or you need to look like this, or you need to act this way, talk this way, do this, do that. We need to do what God told us to do, which is to live right, be holy, and we also don't need to fear man. The other day I was thinking about the word intimidate, and how the word timid is in that same word. So the word intimidate means to make timid or fill with fear. It also means to force into or deter from some action by inducing fear. And that reminds me of how the Israelites, that was in the book of Numbers, how the Israelites were intimidated and fearful when they saw the giants, the people that were like taller and bigger than them in their promised land, and they didn't want to go. Just because somebody's bigger than you and taller than you, they might look scary. As long as God with you, nothing else matters. The size of that so-called giant, the size of that so-called Goliath does not matter. And the word timid means fearful. It also means lacking in self-assurance, courage, or bravery. It also means that a person that's easily alarmed. Fear will definitely cause you to not have confidence, to not feel like you're capable. Fear can also cloud your judgment. So I just want to tell you, don't let anything intimidate you. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes, depending on what it is, it may look impossible. It may look like you're not capable of handling it. But the word does says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Don't let anything intimidate you or make you afraid. Don't give in to fear, and don't live your life in fear. As long as God with you, he will give you strength, even if you are feeling afraid. I have felt afraid, even just dealing with attacks from the enemy, and just feeling like, when is this ever going to end? Or am I going to have an attack when I'm going to this place or that place? And just feeling like, am I going to pass out or something? Don't settle for that. Don't put up with that. God is with you. He's with me. He's with all of us believers. Just keep asking him for help. He is always with you. He will never leave you.